There is nothing I love more than an amazing meal with high-quality meat cooked at home because, let's be honest, eating out is so expensive. And you also know that eating out is the number one budget buster. That is why I am so glad I found ButcherBox. ButcherBox is a premium meat subscription service dedicated to delivering high-quality, grass-fed, and grass-finished beef, organic chicken, pork raised crate-free, and wild-caught seafood directly to your doorstep with free shipping always. You even get exclusive member deals, recipes, and a variety of high-quality cuts at an amazing price. New users will receive their choice of 2 pounds of ground beef, 3 pounds of chicken thighs, or 1 pound of premium steak tips for a year. Use code ETM and get $20 off your first box at butcherbox.com. Last night we made a beef stew with meat from ButcherBox, and you can taste the difference. It was so satisfying and delicious, and all of our friends that were over for a dinner party, they raved at how good it was. So do yourself a favor and eat better this year with the best meat and seafood on the planet delivered to your door. ButcherBox is offering my listeners their choice of a weeknight meal essential: 3 pounds of chicken thighs, 2 pounds of ground beef, or 1 pound of premium steak tips for free in every order for a year. Plus, get $20 off your first order. Sign up today at butcherbox.com/ETM and use code ETM to choose your free offer and get $20 off.
Millions of people have lost weight with personalized plans from Noom. Like Evan, who can't stand salads and still lost 50 pounds.
Salads generally for most people are the easy button, right? For me, that wasn't an option. I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. But Noom worked for me.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom user compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
So I think what's interesting to people is that in modern society, we're always going, that life moves at a breakneck pace. And with the pandemic, I think we've realized that maybe there's a different way. Maybe that life looks a little bit simpler because it means we can follow our passions, spend time with our families and loved ones, and do what matters to us. So whether it's in a tiny house or whatever your version of simple living is, you're able to craft a life that is more intentional and better purpose-built to you. And that could be through entrepreneurship, through aggressive financial tactics, or just thinking critically about the life you want to lead.
Welcome to Everyone's Talkin' Money podcast. I'm your host, Shannah Game. There's no judgment, no dumb questions, just smart conversations about you and your money. So come on in and grab a seat. Everyone is welcome here. Welcome back to the show. It is so good to have you here. Okay, I've got a question for you. Are you letting life dictate what goals you can achieve, or are you cultivating a life that can support your goals? If you fall into the former, just know you are so not alone. This is most of us. Life just has a way of happening and unfolding, and we have these goals, but for some reason, we're just not getting any closer to them. That's why I think you're going to really love our guest today on the pod. So living in only 150 square feet for years, Ryan Mitchell has learned a thing or two about this idea of living simply. From downsizing to life simplification and designing a life that's right for you, Ryan brings a lot of experience and practical knowledge to the table. And get this, he built his own tiny house in 2012, and he uses what he learned to inspire you and everyone else to cultivate this journey of living simply. He still lives in this tiny house, which is off the grid with solar, and he teaches others how to live simply as well. We talk about what does it mean to live simply? Why does this matter? And how it might be the missing piece to you achieving all the stuff you want in life. So excited for you to hear this one. I'm Shannah Compton Game. This is Millennial Money. Let's get into the conversation. we've got a lot to talk about. And I wanted to just start out getting your opinion. I mean, I think we all know why this has happened, but specifically because you've crafted a life living very simplistically, like what do you think has motivated people over the last, in particular, like year and a half to really quit their jobs and just reevaluate how they want to live their life?
Yeah. I mean, I think simple living has always been an interest of modern life, right? Everyone is going faster and faster, getting more complicated, and feels like they're always behind. And so I think there's always a draw to people who want to live more simply. But, in the past year and a half, I think we've had to slow down for, reasons such as like a pandemic. And we found ourselves at home spending time with the people that presumably we care about. And for parents, that means they're spending more time with their kids. For couples, that means they're spending more time with their spouse or significant other, things like that. And I think it brought into focus what is really important and maybe what is less important. And then I think just slowing down gives us the bandwidth to stop and think and consider the life that we've built and where we're at. And I think that's the big advantage that we've had over the past year and a half or so.
And it's really interesting because at the beginning of the pandemic, everybody was freaking out because life was going to change. And then now everybody's freaking out because we don't want to go back to the way life was before necessarily. So it's like this really interesting parallel that has happened.
Yeah, it's surprising how adaptable humans are. And I think it also kind of showed us the light, right? Like this is what could be, or at least a glimmer of what could be. And then I think also there's a lot of people who it hit critical mass or pushed them over the edge to where they were like, enough, right? Like this is not okay. Or I want something better. Or if, let's say my employment isn't secure or it's not a healthy relationship, like then I got to do something about it. So yeah, I think there's just been a lot of change that's happened with that.
And we're going to do a deep dive into your story in just a bit, but just to start out, I'd love for you to lay the landscape a little bit of what is living simply about? Why is it so powerful?
Yeah. So I think traditionally what we've all come to kind of expect or live out is we kind of follow this standard narrative, and that narrative is prescribed by culture in general. And for a long time, I think it was reinforced because if you did these things, you would generally have a quote unquote successful life where you could look back and say like, good job. Like I have the things that I like, I have a good life. But I think that's changed. So the typical thing was go to school, do well in school, graduate, go to college, get your degree. That degree gets you a good job. You work hard at your job and you stay loyal to the company, and you're going to work for a while. You're going to have a nice house, get married, 2.5 kids, white picket fence, midway through, buy yourself, a fancy red car, and then you're going to retire at 65 with a nice pension. That is the world that our parents and our grandparents lived. And it was one that I quickly realized wasn't the reality when I stepped out of my master's program back in 2009. And whether, there's different ways to go about it, but I think the strength of this is we can question and take a moment to step back and question what's right for us. And I think that introspective nature or process is going to produce a much better result for everyone involved. And it may be that you stay on that standard path, but at least it's a path you've chosen. So I think generally it's about living intentionally and choosing the path you want to lead.
And I think what you're sharing is so fascinating because as humans, like we we just get in the flow of living life, and
Yep.
we don't take that time to step back and say, am I living intentionally, or what actually is my vision for life? And
Right.
it's almost like it's so easy, and yet I don't know how you feel, but it's actually a hard exercise to do because you have to really look at your life from a different perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a combination of modern life is so fast that we don't have a moment to think, and that also the you call it the system, the culture, whatever you want, is designed from the ground up to be optimized to not let you think, so that a company or a product or a service or something like that can prosper to their benefit with kind of
Yeah.
drawing you in, right? Like that's the whole thing. If people thought a little bit more, they say maybe that isn't right for me, or they might, but at least they've chosen.
I like that. I like the idea of having choice. It's so
Mhm.
important. And I want to talk a little bit about quitting your job or retiring early or whatever that might look like for whoever is listening. I know you have your own story. I recently did an episode where I had a guest who was an expert on taking a career
Mhm.
break. And I got a lot of pushback actually from people saying, okay, but that actually isn't feasible for most people. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are. The idea of transforming your life that way, if you decide that you want to live a different version of life, or maybe you want to quit your job for a while, or whatever that might be. I mean, is that feasible, or is that more of just a fantasy for most of us?
Yeah. Well, I think predictably my answer is it is feasible. But then let me kind of phrase it this way: like, what is the cost of not doing that? Right?
Yeah.
The cost could be, all right, you're going to get to 65, you're going to retire, you're going to be estranged from your whole family, you're going to be in debt, and you'll be so stressed out you're going to retire, and the next day you're going to drop dead of a heart attack. So if that is the cost of a traditional path, I don't know that I'm willing to pay that price. So then to flip it, it's like I need to figure it out because I'm not willing to pay that price. So I might be willing to pay a different price. I need to figure out what that price is. But I think you kind of have to.
Hmm. So how do you then work the money side around that? If you're figuring out, okay, I don't think this is working for me, like how do we get our money to come around that and support whatever the new vision is?
Yeah. So I think how I did it, and a little bit of my background was initially I was in HR, traditional job career, and I started a side project to basically facilitate me to earn a living, to be self-employed. Now, I don't think you need to be self-employed, but I think it's one option too. And for me, the tack that I took, at least initially, was okay, I'm going to reduce my expenses dramatically as much as I can, right? I'm going to make expenditures and have plays, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
that would reduce my overhead costs in some ways. And we'll talk about that with tiny houses and then solar and things like that. And then from there, looking at, okay, so now we've reduced our financial burden ongoing. Then we get out of debt, standard playbook here. And then from there, it was focusing on increasing income. So I think it has to be a mix of those things. And then once you increase your income to a place where you can live comfortably, you need to make save up money, expand your kind of rainy day fund, make sure you have a good runway. And then at some point you have to very intentionally make that leap to whatever that new life is. It could be entrepreneurship. It could be a new job, whatever that is. At some point you have to make the switch. And then from there, I started looking at ways that I could not only earn more, but how could I diversify my income to help bring resiliency to my system so that
Right.
I was not beholden to one income source, that as the economy flexed and moved, that I wasn't, just like, winning or losing based off of like the stock market or something
Yeah.
like that. So those were some of the things that I did kind of when I first started out, and we can get into more details if you have questions on that.
Yeah. Okay. I want to talk everything about tiny house because no, you live in I believe it's 150 square foot tiny house,
Yes.
which is pretty tiny.
Yes.
I love the idea of tiny house. I mean, I'm like addicted to all the shows about tiny house builders. I mean, everything. It's really interesting to me, and I don't know practically. As I look around at all my stuff, it's like I got a lot of stuff. Like, do I
Yep.
need all this stuff? So how did you decide that a tiny house was at least going to be kind of your first step foray into this life?
Yeah. So I like to point out that like I really don't advocate so much for tiny houses. I like tiny houses, but what I do advocate for is like you being conscious and intentional with the way that you're housing, how you approach housing and the costs associated with that, because that's typically one of the largest line item expenses. And so to kind of roll it back, when I was out of graduate school, the 2009, the economy tanked. And I remember looking at my budget and realizing about half my income was going towards rent, utilities, insurance, maintenance, things like that. And so I said, crazy question, what can I do to eliminate that line item? And if I knew if I could do it, I would regain essentially half my income, which meant that I could save for a rainy day. I could be a little bit more aggressive with like, entrepreneurial activities or whatever. So when it comes to tiny houses, it may not be right for you, but what I encourage people to do is think about your housing situation, get realistic on the possessions that you have, because a lot of times you don't own the possessions own you. And they do that through cluttering your house. They do that through debt. They do that through your obsession of shopping and things like that. So I don't hate things. I just have a healthier relationship with things. There's things that I buy that I really enjoy, and then I've just kind of deprogrammed myself to not always be buying like I used to, and like a lot of people do. So yeah, I mean, a tiny house is probably not right for most people, but maybe a small home is, or a method that you can reduce your things. It could be a little bit nicer less nicer apartment for right now. It could be going a little bit more rural and having remote work. It could be building your own house. It could be, there's a few things you can do, but like the housing was a big thing for me, because it reduced my expenses from about $1,500 a month is what I was running back then, down to $15 a month.
Wow.
And I mean, that's life-changing money for someone at that stage in my career, right? Like I could work 1 hour at McDonald's right now and pay for what it costs me to live in my house. So yeah, when you do things like that, you make those big plays, you're suddenly changing the whole game, and you're changing it to your advantage. And it's not that you have to do that forever. But you can make huge gains and get out of like that vicious cycle where you're trapped in debt and continuous bills and things like that. And you basically gain escape velocity out of those places, and then you're in a better place. And then maybe later on, and this is kind of my story, is the tiny house is a stepping stone. So now I'm basically saving up to buy a house, a traditional sized house, I guess you could say, with cash. So I'm taking a 30-year mortgage, and I'm basically distilling it down to 3 years of payments. So those are some of the things that I think about.
Listen, if you've been using Mint to manage your money, I have got some news for you. First, the bad news. As you might know, Mint is shutting down for good. But the good news, well, there is a way better alternative that is a personal favorite of mine, Monarch Money. And I'm not the only lover of Monarch Money. Many Mint users are turning to Monarch Money and just raving about it. I used to manage my money with an Excel spreadsheet. I know, so archaic, and it was so time-consuming. I tried all of the apps, but I just didn't find one I liked until I found Monarch. And I've got to tell you a secret. Monarch is so easy to use with a very intuitive design. You can even collaborate with your partner, and you can customize Monarch for whatever your needs are. Monarch is the top-rated all-in-one personal finance app. It gives you a comprehensive view of all your accounts, investments, transactions, and more. Create custom budgets, set goals, and collaborate with your partner. And now get an extended 30-day free trial when you go to monarchmoney.com/ETM. Let's go back to the collaboration bit. Because we know money is a leading cause of divorce and breakups, Monarch has built-in collaboration features so you can invite your partner at no extra cost. You can see all your finances, make a budget together, get insights on your cash. Yes, cue the confetti. There will literally not be any more arguments over money. And if you've been frustrated with personal finance apps that are cluttered with ads, difficult to use, or rarely updated, so was Monarch. They built a new kind of personal finance app that's intuitive and powerful, ad-free, and constantly improving based on customer feedback. Monarch has a tool that allows you as well to easily import your data from Mint. You can keep all of your tags and all of your categories. After trying Monarch for myself, I understand why it's the top-rated personal finance app. And right now, get an extended 30-day free trial when you go to monarchmoney.com/ETM. That's monarchmoney.com/ETM for your extended 30-day free trial. Financial anxiety, anyone? Yeah, you're not alone. But worrying about it, it doesn't help. Earnin does. Earnin is an app that gives you access to your pay-as-you-work up to $100 per day or up to $750 per pay period. You just download the Earnin app and verify your paycheck. Then you can access up to $100 per day as you work and leave an additional tip. Any money you access plus tips are automatically repaid from your next paycheck. So how would you spend the money you get from Earnin? Well, honestly, my hubby and I have been feeling a little bit disconnected lately. That's what happens after you've been together about 12 years. So I would spend the money on a special date night with dinner and maybe bowling, to bring back some of that giggly excitement that we both felt at the beginning. Make Earnin a part of your financial routine and join Earnin's over 3.5 million customers who say things like, when I think about Earnin, I think about financial stability, security. It gives me a lot of peace of mind. Download Earnin today, spelled EARNIN, in the Google Play or Apple App Store. When you download the Earnin app, type in Talkin', TALKAN, money under podcast when you sign up. It will really help the show. Talkin' money under podcast. Subject to your available earnings, location, daily max, and pay period max. See earnin.com/TOS for details. Earnin is a financial technology company, not a bank. Bank products are issued by Evolve Bank and Trust, member FDIC. When it comes to financial advice, you got to trust the source. It's why you listen to this podcast. When I'm looking to upgrade my wallet, I turn to NerdWallet. Their expert team of nerds dives into the details to help you find smarter financial products. Before NerdWallet, I was paying for vacations all wrong. I was missing out on miles I didn't even know I was leaving on the table. Now I've got a new card with more miles and more upgrades. What could future you do with more travel rewards? I don't know, maybe that fancy hotel upgrade that you have always been dreaming about. Wherever you go next, make it happen with a smarter travel credit card. Don't wait to make smart financial decisions. Compare and find smarter credit cards, savings accounts, and more today at nerdwallet.com. NerdWallet. Finance smarter. As with all cards, credit is subject to lender approval and terms apply. Walk us through a little bit of that mindset shift to I feel like because life is so fast paced, and maybe even if somebody listening here knows that they're spending so much money on stuff and on their housing, whatever that might be, what is the mindset that has to kind of come along in order for you to just be like, okay, yeah, I need to make a change. And I'm going to make that change. I feel like there needs to be a shift that almost happens there.
Yeah. I think that for the people that have done it, and I've thought a lot about this because it's nuanced and it's difficult to put your finger on, right? So what I find is the commonality of people who make the shift versus people who just talk about making this shift is there's usually some kind of big event that's typically, it's usually kind of tragic. So it's usually like a job loss,
Right.
a death in the family, someone close to you dies, some significant recession can help, be that trigger. And you need to get to the point where you're basically saying like, I don't have a choice, and or like, I'm not going to take this anymore and I'm just going to figure it out. Because I think all the things that we're talking about, especially when it comes to money, right? What we're basically doing is we're delaying gratification, sometimes for years. For me, it was, years and years before I could actually start to build a tiny house and then see that impact. So we need some motivation that's going to sustain us for a very long time as we delay gratification in things like money and spending and sometimes even social stuff or status symbols, things like that. So that's the best answer that I've come up with on how people go about that.
Right. It's almost like you reset things, right? Like you hit the reset button and you made these intentional choices, and then now you're choosing to live life, going back into a house or whatever that might be, but you're doing it now on your terms from like a better footing.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And whoever's listening, what you're saying, Ryan, right, is like, take your interpretation of this, whatever that looks like in your life. This is your story, but take that and work it to however it can best fit in your own life, which I think is, sometimes we miss that when somebody's telling their story, but it's particularly when it comes to money and changing things. I think it's a really important message.
Yeah. I say that like tiny house, like if you listen to me about tiny houses and you think it's about the house, you've missed the point. Tiny house is a tool, and I have a box of tools, a toolbox, if you will, of different things, levers that I can pull, strategies that I can employ to achieve certain goals. And so tiny houses is one of them. Budgeting is another, delaying gratification and discipline is another. All these tools in our toolbox that we can leverage to build a life towards the goal that we've assembled as the ultimate goal for ourselves.
I'm Samantha Cole, host of the new season of Understood, the Pornhub Empire. Over the course of 4 episodes, I'll tell you how a horny YouTube knockoff in Canada came to dominate the porn world, only to shatter their cheeky reputation in a massive scandal. The Pornhub Empire is a new season of Understood from the CBC. Available now wherever you get your podcasts.
Want to know the number one money question I'm asked? It's how to get started investing without being overwhelmed. So if you're asking yourself the same question, then you have to check out the Investing for Beginners podcast. The hosts, Dave and Andrew, they break down investment terms and strategies in a way you can finally understand. I love that they're making investing accessible, and they have an entire podcast dedicated to helping you invest better. Even if you're not ready to start investing, they explain the stock market and financial updates so you can really understand what is being said on the news. If you're ready to learn more about investing, I'd recommend you start with 2 of my favorite episodes. Listener Q&A, how do you start investing with $1,000, where they explain how you get started right away, and Back to Basics of Building Your Portfolio, where they explain how to build a portfolio from scratch. The Investing for Beginners podcast is a great way to start expanding your relationship with money. Find Investing for Beginners podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hi, I'm Karina Beamisturfer, host of Morning Cup of Murder, your daily true crime podcast. Yes, you heard me right, daily true crime. Every day, Morning Cup of Murder tells you a straightforward, short-form story about murder, true crime, cold cases, disappearances, serial killers, cults, and more. And I do that all in under 15 minutes. With over 3 years of stories and over 20 million downloads, the Morning Cup of Murder podcast has become a staple of so many people's daily routines. So, why not add it to yours? Stream Morning Cup of Murder everywhere you listen to podcasts, and remember, stay safe.
I like that. I always talk about having a toolkit and using these tools, and you pull out the tool when you need it. And I think that's a really great way to approach money. And it makes it tangible. I think it makes it more tangible. You mentioned solar. I'd love to hear your thoughts on solar. I'm somehow like suddenly becoming a geek with solar.
Yeah.
But is that like another tool in your toolkit?
Yeah. I mean, maybe you could say like the mindset is like to identify large costs and knock them down like creatively. So the first one for me was housing. That was about 50% of my budget at that time. So I said, how do I just get this out of my, remove this line item or reduce it so drastically? Tiny house was that answer. Then I looked at my next big bills and I said, are there creative ways that I could address these? And, some of them you can't get around. You have to think creatively, because I think people will say of course you're going to have a bill for your house. Like, how else would you like that? That seems crazy, but I figured out a way. Then I looked at some of my other budgets, next, like largest budget items. And I was like, okay, well, utilities is a certain cost. And what I figured out was, hey, if I get solar, yes, there's an upfront cost, but then there's no cost after that. So I took my $120-ish power bill every month and reduced it to zero. I haven't paid a power bill in years. So, okay, we took my traditionally what a mortgage would be from $1,500 to $15. We took $120 a month of a utility bill down to zero. My water bill, I figured out that I could do gray water. And then that bill went from like $50. And since I did gray water, the city was willing to remove the sewage. Basically, you use the water and you have to pay to return it. Right. So I got them to remove that half of the bill, which is actually the largest bill. So that went from like $30, $40, something like that, down to $4 a month. So like I'm looking at knocking down the biggest expenses on my budget. And the common wisdom is like, hey, stop drinking lattes and don't eat avocado toast. Like, that's not going to move the needle.
Not helpful.
No. Yeah. And honestly, like, what I would encourage people, obviously, like, you should have a budget. You should be judicious about your spending. But I'd rather you change jobs and get a 20% income bump than, try to cut out lattes, because a 20% income bump compounded, 3 or 4 times over a decade would be huge. And it's, no amount of cutting out lattes is going to replace that. So just think critically about this stuff.
And your message also isn't about not having any fun in life, right? It's about looking at some of these key areas and making this kind of conscious, very intentional choice about your life, but still balancing that with, I'm still going to live.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think part of it is like reprioritizing things. So, where some people may like go to a club and get bottle service or something like that. Instead, you can kind of shift that to like, hey, I'm going to buy a bottle of wine and go over to a friend's house or something like that. It may be just saying like, hey, I don't need to shop as much because it really doesn't matter to me. Maybe I was doing all that to look on trend for other people. Doesn't matter so much. So yeah, I think you just need to think about those types of things.
So what is it like to be featured in some really like big news outlets just for choosing to live your life on your terms? What is that like?
Yeah, it's it was a little weird, right? I remember there was a point like when I knew like things had really changed was I was at a conference and I literally had Wall Street Journal, NPR, Associated Press, and like BBC in a line waiting to talk to me. Like they were waiting for me to get to them. And I was like,
Wow.
what? Okay, this is crazy. So yeah, I think it's an oddity that people are kind of fascinated by. It's weird for me now because like it's just my house. And even though it's 150 square feet, interestingly enough, it's one of the more comfortable houses that I've ever lived in because it's designed for me from the ground up. Whereas most houses, they're not very well designed. They don't use very good materials. It's like the cheapest possible you can make. And, just from the ground up, it just doesn't feel quite right. They make up a lack of design with more square footage, which is a poor substitute.
I agree. Yeah. So what do you think like fascinated all these news outlets so much? Is it just that like somebody actually said, I'm going to live a different way of life and then went out and did it? Do you think that's the fascination?
I mean, part of it is just like it's an extreme, right? Like living
Sure.
150 square feet is an extreme. So that, the media, traditional media specifically loves catchy headlines and things like that. So that's helpful. I think also like the fact that people do consistently generation to generation want to live more simply. And I think that's further being exacerbated each generation. So I think there's that element to it. But that's what I can think of.
Yeah. So you shared so many amazing sort of takeaways, but I'm curious, like if you had to, sum up like money lessons that you've learned during this time period, what would some of those be that maybe would be helpful to us listening?
Yeah. So the first one that comes to mind is like Murphy is a cruel mistress. I don't know if Murphy is male or female, like Murphy's law. If something can go wrong, it will go wrong. So there's been times where I'll be like really tempted to like, let's say, pay off like the last little bit of debt. But I said, okay, what is the financially prudent thing here? It's like, okay, what level do I need to get at to pay off that debt and then also be financially squared away for a disaster? And I think early on, I was like so excited about paying off the debt. I paid off the debt in full. Like my student loan. And then I was like, let's say, I had two of my tires get blown out of my car and I had to redo the brakes and it was like $1,500. So it's like, oh, I just paid all that money, which is good. I'm out of debt on that. But then like, it kind of left me a little lean. So yeah, I would say like you want to pay off debt, but you also want to be able to pay off debt while having the bandwidth to weather a pretty severe storm, whether that's a medical bill, a car payment, like your AC breaking or your roof going bad, something like that. So that was one tip with that. I mean, there's other people that do a lot of investment stuff. I really haven't done much like real estate investment or portfolio investment kind of stuff. What I found was that betting on myself, I was able to get much better returns on my money. So, for example, in an effort to diversify my income, I invested about $20,000 in a co-working space, and within 26 months, I took that $20,000, earned it back. Then I was also earning a steady 5-figure income off of it.
Wow.
And then I sold that business 26 months after I started it for 6 figures. And I don't know what the exact percentage of return on that is, but it's way better than I could ever do in the stock market. So yeah, I think if you want to do traditional investing, talk to other people, but don't also discount your ability to generate returns on money as well.
Such a great message, really. So where do you think you kind of mentioned that you thought that the tiny, simplistic, minimalist movement is going to keep going. Like, where do you think it's going to go from here? Are we all sort of pushing in that direction, or do you think there'll be a pullback? Or
Yeah, I mean, it's an ebb and flow always, but I think we're at an interesting point now where we're going to see, and I don't know that it's going to be a large movement, but it's definitely happening. But the ruralification, is that a word? We'll
sure, sounds good.
Ruralification of folks, because now people are more willing to be remote and companies are more willing to be remote. I would say if you're listening to this now and you haven't changed your job in like 2, maybe 3 years, you absolutely should be looking, even if it's just to land a remote job, because then you could move to a lower cost of living. You could stay in the same job and maybe do a side hustle with the time that you were using to commute, things like that. Or just like have a little bit simpler life by not having to go in an office and dressing up and all that kind of stuff. So I think we're going to see a trend to that. And in that, rural life is a little bit simpler. Working from home is a little bit simpler. And I think we're in this interesting inflection point where a lot more people are going to be working from home, potentially from, going from city to suburbia or suburbia to rural.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Well, Ryan, this has been so fascinating. I would love for you to tell everyone listening where they can find you and connect with you.
Yeah. So my main website is thetinylife.com. And we have a whole bunch of articles on there. One of them is about like how to quit your job and build a life that's right for you. That's a post. We got there's 1,500 posts on the site, but that's one that I thought might be good for your audience. But generally, the website is thetinylife.com.
Okay, so what do you think? What did you think about Ryan's story? I think it's really interesting. And I get that moving to a tiny house and downsizing the way Ryan has done might not exactly be your idea of a good life. So I hope you take away the concept from what Ryan is talking about and then see how you can impart this idea of living more simply in your own life. I know that I've done this several times in my life, and I've done this recently as I'm planning to move across the country and just thinking about, what do I want my space to be about? What do I want my life to be about? What do I want my money to be about? And so I think really thinking about these things, it changes the conversation and can potentially, no, I think it does change your relationship with money because you feel more in control. Like Ryan said, this is the life I want to create. And then he did it. He created it. And I think his story is just so fascinating. Hey, if you love this episode, the biggest compliment you can pay me is to share it with a few friends right now. Tell them about Ryan's story and tell them why they need to listen to this episode. You can head to the show notes for links to our guest as well as our sponsors.